Another bracket before I begin to preach. I've been intrigued thinking about this whole process of who were the Methodists in this time with a novel. I've spoken to you about it called Neville Truman, Pioneer Preacher. The author was William Withrow, who during the time that he was writing it was the circuit rider in the Niagara circuit here in Niagara on the Lake in 1870s. He says that he spoke to people who'd been there during the War of 1812. The subtitle of the book was The Journeys of an Itinerant Preacher in 1812. He says, a good deal of pains have been taken by the careful study of the most authentic memoirs, documents, and histories referring to the period, by personal examination of physical aspects of the scene of the story, and by frequent conversations with some of the principal actors in the stirring drama of the time, most of whom, alas, have now passed away, to give a verisimilitude to the narrative that shall, it is hoped, reproduce in no distorted manner this memorable period. Well, William tells a story about Neville Truman that has us wondering. Neville Truman was present on the border as war was declared and as the first shots were fired back and forth by sentries who just wanted to make trouble across the border. He stayed with the squire and helped to take goods from the farm up to the fort at George. He participated in the first meeting of the Methodist quarterly meeting that was held in Upper Canada, either at the Warner Chapel or at Beaver Dams. He participated in the Battle of Queenston Heights. Just happened to be traveling along the road with a wagon of supplies and saw Brock's body being taken lifeless down the hill and placed in state in a house in Queenston. Stopped a while and realized that he was most needed there. Helped out in the surgery. Did some surgery apparently. Got quite good at it. Also had prayers with those who were frightened and suffering. And when the call came for someone to participate in the mass burial of all of the war dead, they called on Neville Truman because he was faithfully there. One story that stretches my understanding is of a June day in 1813 when Neville Truman was riding his horse through the Beaver Dams district and came upon a young woman confused and lost and at the end of her energy, and found an important message that she needed to carry on to the DQ headquarters, helped her out, made a sling out of his bedroll and carried her on the edge of his horse so that she could bring her message to DQ or to Fitzgibbon at DQ House, and never claimed a bit of credit for it, so that his name is lost to history and only Laura Secord we hear about these days. I decided that it would be inappropriate for Ninian Holmes or Neville Truman to show up yesterday in Queenston and try and tell a different version of the story than the candy-colored version that we mostly hear. Withrow, though, had as his purpose, it seems, to say to any who questioned the loyalty of the Methodists that the leaders of the Methodist community, the circuit riders, had really been heroes, not like the ones who fought in battles, but heroes who brought the community together, who carried news back and forth, who were there at the important events, not because any law required them to be, but because of their wish to be there in any cases where people were suffering, were challenged, had difficulties, or were celebrating, and where good things were happening. It seemed that often the circuit riders showed up on those occasions. And Withrow, wanting to point to the heroes of the time, chooses Neville Truman, who's everywhere, every man, every person, and one with whom we can celebrate and give thanks. Let's pray. O loving God, we thank you that we can come together across miles, across dusty roads, across difficult times, to gather to worship. And we open our hearts and our minds to you. Speak to us, address us in faith. Give us your promise. Amen. Rivers in our time matter, don't they? Every one of us knows about the rivers by which supplies are brought into our land. The St. Lawrence, the mighty Niagara, the Detroit River, and in my home territory, the Thames River. The way by which the nation is opened up. By water travel, we're able to move up the rivers and gradually open up more and more and more territory. The rivers that allow our beasts and cattle to be watered, that allow our crops to grow, that offer us fish. And then the barges of supplies, American Yankee sellers that come up and bring all the stuff that who could have wondered would ever have arrived at the edge of our farm, brought by the tinkers, cloth and iron goods and pottery and ceramics, books and stories. The rivers were the means by which our land opened up. And rivers were also the edges of adventure, for as we crossed each river, we looked at a new part of what life was about. I remember as a kid, we could travel across the river at Elizabethtown to Johnstown and down into the States and discover a whole new culture, a different way of being, a different bunch of folks who spoke the same language as we did, but were just a bit different, a bit rougher it seemed, and a little less cultivated, more ready to go off in any one direction, anger or joy, than we more cautious Canadians. In Niagara, too, what great back and forth there was across the river as we and the Americans across the way were friends and partied back and forth. Although we Methodists weren't much for that kind of partying, we did gather to worship on both sides of the river and had opportunities to invite each other to tent and camp meetings when we could tell the good news of Christ across a border. In Detroit, too, when I first arrived in the Detroit area, the border, it seemed, was a harsh place. On one side were civilized Upper Canadians, and on the other side were the rough and ready French. The voyageurs, still the pioneers, Roman Catholic and not like us, but still ready to make friends, still ready to hear a story about God's love. The rivers were places of adventure, places of new learning. And now in 1813, rivers have become barriers of suspicion. On other side of river stand forces whose purpose is to overrun us, to take our communities, our way of life, and claim it for someone else. Now across river come bombardments, cannonballs, rifle shot, flares, and troops by hundreds and thousands. Now rivers have become places of suspicion, places of caution, places of danger, and we've moved away from the rivers, places where we're vulnerable and where we're at risk. And in our time, we hear that message in Jesus Christ. Blessed are you when you're poor. Blessed are you when you're hungry. Blessed are you when you weep. Blessed are you when others hate you and exclude you and insult you. And we rest in that knowledge that God, whose love reaches out to every one of us, reaches out to us in our tender, frightened state, worried about what may yet come of us, worried about battles still to come. We're invited to rest in God, who in Jesus Christ promises love beyond our measure. We're invited to trust that God has plans for us, has an expectation for us that's got a future. And finally, we're invited to trust that at the end of our lives, God invites us into a new heaven, into a place where we rest, where we're joined with those who've come before, who've died before, and who come to God's holy place. The book of Revelation describes that in God's place there's a river, another river, a river that flows from the throne of God with trees on both sides, trees bearing every kind of fruit. That river is one that we'll find golden and flowing and precious, that will reassure us love wins out in the end over battles and fear and fright. God's promise still holds firm. So each one of us in this troubled time are invited to remember God's river, are invited to see ourselves standing on the edge of God's promises, are invited to see ourselves as heirs of God's good gifts. Shall we gather at the river? Shall we gather at the river, the beautiful river? Shall we gather by the river that flows through the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. God's promise to every one of us. Yes, we are loved. Yes, we are accepted. Yes, we're welcome in the arms of loving God. Thanks be to God. Bless you. Keep you well. I'll pray for you and pray that you'll pray for me in days ahead and always. Thanks be to God.